Sure.
All right, let's get started. You go first.
Hi. Gonna start off with this poem. I just titled this poem, but this poem is at least 10 years old. Yeah. Becoming one with her. I think I'm going to go to the beach soon. I want to give my problems to the ocean. I want to give myself to the ocean. Be a part of something that will endlessly flow, being vast, something to stare at. I don't want to be worthless. I don't want to be, I want to be a constant, dependable, with unchanged emotions, to forever care no matter how many oil spills I'm hit with and still be here.
This poem is titled Water is Rising. Water is rising, so I can too. From the depths of the world's beginning, she's churning a song and a story on our shores that we've never heard before. Some say she's pleading, some say she's damning. I say, I say, I say, if she rises, I can too. If she storms and swells and sparkles on the horizon, day and night without asking for permission, I can too. If she can take my prayers at the edge of a waterfall and whisper her secrets at the edge of a stream, I can too. Let me be her boulder. Let me be her creek bed. Let me be the cliffside she can glide on. I say, I say, I say, if water is rising to the occasion to meet me, then I will meet her. Both hands submerge into the clear current, and I will speak. Thank you. Kind of want to get started in there.
That was awesome. That was so lovely. Thank you both. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you, Tayllor and Ade. That was incredible. And welcome everyone to our Spoken Word Water Wednesday seminar. So I'm Linda Cabot and I'm president of Bow State Ocean Awareness Programs. And I thought that we could begin with just introductions of you two. And Tayllor is an artist, educator, performer who has been writing and performing both plays and poetry for over 10 years. She just got her master's degree from NYU. And Tayllor, when I was looking at your biography, I loved the mission statement that you wrote. So I was just going to read that as well. So Tayllor wrote that part of what's really important for her is finding new ways poetry can empower the voiceless, soothe the wounded, and disturb the status quo, setting us all on a path to freedom. And I first met or got in touch with Tayllor, I don't know, it was like 8 years ago. At Bow Seat, I was just on Google trying to find a spoken word artist who was talking about plastic pollution. And I came across your video. I think you were a senior in high school. And I was just struck by your artistry and your poise, but the power of your message as well. So we started a partnership there, and now we've come full circle almost 8 years later, because Tayllor is going to be leading, we're working in partnership with her for our new Voice of the Sea Award, which is based on spoken word. And we're going to have exciting new prizes, a lot of great content with educational webinars, resources, and that things for students. So we can talk more about that later. And Ade, is the first time we're seeing you, and it's great to have you here as well. And I know that you're an educator too, and you are I mean, my goodness, you are a photographer, musician, singer, songwriter, poet, and writer, and also a teacher at the St. Anne's School in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you work, I think, with grades 2 to 5. And I think later on in the program, we'll talk more about bringing spoken word into the classroom and some of the challenges and power that can have. But again, welcome tonight. And I think we're going to start with a discussion before we open it up to questions from everybody here with us this evening. And then we'll talk more about the Voice of the Sea Award programming at the end. Tayllor, you had a great idea to start us all off with like a one word or even what you want to get out of this evening.
Yeah.
Hearing from folks who are tuning in.
Yeah, so welcome everyone who's here to the space as an artist, as a performer, and just as a human. I wanted to check in with everybody. I welcome you to put kind of what you're looking forward to as a participant in this webinar, what you hope to learn, but also, you know, if you have just a word of how you're feeling right now. There's a lot happening outside of this webinar and in, you know, kind of like the world, there's a lot going on. So any space that I'm in, I want to make it as human as possible. And we're talking about the environment, we're talking about art, and art is about honesty and authenticity. So I invite you to have, if there's a word that you're feeling about the way you're feeling right now, you can bring it to the space. I welcome it. And also what you're looking to learn and take from this webinar too. All is welcome. So I'm gonna put mine in the chat first, just to add.
Mhm.
So a lot of good vibes here.
I'm feeling it. I'm loving it.
Yeah.
I'm loving the vibes.
And you know, it'd be great to hear too where people are from or where they are in the world. And it's always nice to feel like we're part of this sort of bigger community. But I thought maybe for beginning the discussion, we could talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about defining spoken word. And as someone who's always loved poetry, who writes poetry, I sort of put it in the drawers and under the bed. I don't ever send it out. But I've always been very interested in the history of poetry. And spoken word, as many of we all know, it dates back before even writing. And spoken word was the way that people communicated in terms of passing on, you know, histories, information, cultural norms from one generation to the next, from one neighbor to the next, from one town to the next. And it's amazing that back then they used the devices of repeating phrases and rhyme because that was easy to memorize so that your child could learn at your next door neighbor and pass it on. So spoken word was the first poetry. And obviously it's evolved over the centuries and even evolved into written poetry and which is a whole nother, actually,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
And then, so poetry is also, spoken word has evolved too, depending on what culture you're from. But in the United States, it's, I don't know, it's become a really powerful tool, I think. And I was wondering if you could both sort of talk about how you think of spoken word and its sort of relevance or importance.
Do you want to start?
You can start first.
Okay, I'll start. So the one thing that I've been doing poetry for a while, spoken word poetry, and in French class, I learned about, I think they're called like chanteuses or singers. They would basically, you know, perform poetry and songs across many kingdoms, and they were highly regarded. They would be welcomed into palaces to tell their stories, and they would have their stories memorized, and then they would go on to the next village or the next place and sing their stories or tell their stories, you know. So for me, spoken word is about storytelling, but it's also this, like you said, it's from such a long time ago. You know, it's not brand new. So it comes with, for me, with the responsibility to like tell your truth. So in terms of mechanics, for me, spoken word is, you know, writing, editing, performing a poem. or editing a poem because it's going to be on stage and it's going to be shared with a wide range of people. I also write poetry that no one will ever see. But if I'm writing a poem like the poem that I performed, I know that it's going to be performed in front of people, and my goal is to connect to myself and to connect to the audience. So for me, that's kind of what spoken word means, and I think it connects to, like you said, a tradition of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. On that same, in that same kind of light of spoken word being storytelling, my parents both are both poets, and I grew up around poetry, so I got to understand spoken word from a different perspective. I got to understand it separate from poetry, because poetry, just as the written word and as this way of storytelling, because poetry is in so many different things. Poetic ways to tell a story can be in so many different ways of the way we communicate, whether it's in a slogan, or it's in a song, or it's in the way somebody designs something. There's a story there. So but spoken word itself, to me, is like rap. That's rhythm and poetry. That's which of course hip hop came from that, and they call them the same thing, but it's different. Hip hop was just supposed to be the bop bop, and rap is the more you have a story from A line to B, and that's spoken word. I grew up learning that it's when I'm writing something, and like the poem that I read tonight, it's something that when I originally wrote it, I could still remember how I felt, and that I felt like I wanted somebody else to hear it, because I might have had those feelings not just for me, but for somebody else. So somebody else might feel like that they want to give themselves to the ocean in a good or a bad way. But then when they hear the poem, they might feel like I'm or somebody else is just empathizing with them, and somebody feels them. So I don't write that intention of that. I just know that after I'm done, like, this might be for more than just me. So spoken word, it ends up being for more than just one person, a speech, a rap, a slogan, something, but if it's done in that way, if it's done with that flow, with that love of poetry in it.
It's a special type of connection when you have with your audience. And that's why I think it's something that is invaluable, especially to young people, is we're having a spirit to spirit, subconscious to subconscious connection when I'm performing live in front of people. They're all strangers. You're all strangers to me, but we shared a moment together at the beginning of this that's beyond just conversation, or you're reading my words on the page.
Yeah. I mean, it's so fascinating because I've spent so much time just reading poetry, but having the voice enter in and having performance just changes it a lot, I think. And I was wondering if we could talk about that, how using, I remember, Tayllor, when we first started talking about this like 2 weeks ago, you were talking about how empowering it is to use your voice, to have people listen to your voice in real time. And so there's a magic there that happens. I love poetry, written poetry, but it doesn't happen as much on the page when a reader's just reading it by themselves. And maybe you could talk more about that act, that performance, that theater, and why that is so powerful.
It's definitely an interdisciplinary practice. And the way that I found poetry, I always say poetry found me, because I definitely wasn't looking for it. I was kind of one of those, young people, roses are red, violets are blue. Like, the poetry wasn't for me. I couldn't connect to it until I found spoken word. I was in a class dedicated to spoken word. I still didn't want to be in that class, but it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. And what I found, going into the 9th grade, just starting high school, is that I had a voice, and that I could put words together that no one else can put together because they came from me. And I could talk about things that were happening to me. I can talk about things that are happening in the world. And I always say this, I think it was a day in June or July that I walked into that class, but I call that my second birthday. Whatever day that was is my second birthday. I went from seeing the world in black and white to Technicolor, because I now had a tool to create my world and describe my world. As a young person, that was invaluable. I could write about racism. I could do that poem in my marine biology course about plastic pollution. I mean, it it brought so much possibility, and I didn't realize how small I thought I was. And as an educator today, it reminds me that there's other young people who might feel small as well. And how can I pass that? Because you couldn't shut me up after I learned.
No, that's I feel it's so interesting. Even though I have two parents that were both my parents that were in the arts, I didn't I wasn't privy to it. Like it wasn't just something that like I thought that I'm gonna go and perform. It wasn't until something kind of made me like something had to snap within me, which was I feel I was around 14, 15, and I not going to go through the whole story, but I felt like I needed some kind of kinship with other artistic people. And I was in this Catholic high school, and I was like, I don't know what to do. A lot of times beforehand, I had been through a situation like I want to go on a trip, and my mom wouldn't let me go on a trip. I wrote a poem like, and I use all the best vocabulary words I could in that poem, and I'm like, I know I am so, you know, I'm a horrid child, but I promise to be the most beautiful thing that you've ever seen tomorrow if I get to go on a trip, like, you know, just using it in my way. But then it didn't feel like it was it didn't feel like it was an extra tool just for a cute thing anymore. You know, every time I wrote, it felt like I could connect with somebody. But once I got to see people in urban word and other people perform, or see how some of the people, because my dad had an open mic and has an open mic, but he doesn't do it as much anymore. It's not in person, but it's online. When it was in person, so many different people would come to his house every Sunday and perform. So I saw that as like an opportunity, because I also liked acting. I saw that as an opportunity to merge the two and find this balance within myself, where I'm one with the audience, but I'm also telling my truth, and I'm not losing myself in it. But because I've had friends that lose themselves in it, and I mean, they end up doing really crazy things, but they can perform really well. But then the self-care isn't there, and a lot of things, you know, too much has to happen for them to get up on stage and perform this amazing poem. So I had to find that balance. And once I found that balance of like taking care of myself and taking and writing what I want to say and saying it in the way I want to say it without because you can leave your heart on the stage, but I don't recommend that to everybody the way that we used to in urban words say that, because it's hard. You do that and then you end up not feeling the greatest, unless you can leave your heart on the stage if you're gonna have therapy the next day, because it's gonna go deep and it's gonna affect you, and you're gonna think, dang, I really did that. And unless you get the perfect score, that's not what it's for. It's for you, and it's for, you know, that moment. You know, even if you think it's for a score, you wrote the poem more than to win a competition, you know. So when it comes down to slam, but of course, if it's in some other way, it's been it's such a good connection with the people on stage when you perform like that, you know.
So poetry slams, are they scored most of the time?
Yeah. So a slam is scored and open mic is not.
And it's usually, it's
well, you can give the parameters of.
So there's judges, you perform your poem, there's usually a time limit, and then you get a score.
3 minutes, 10 seconds grace period, 15 seconds grace period.
And then you get a score from the judges.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a part of spoken word that's a little bit different. So you're not only writing to perform, you're writing to kind of impress to a certain degree. And we both were in the slam community, and I think he speaks to such a great point about spoken word and why I think anybody can do it. But it's a community sport, you know, in terms of the performing. There's a connection to other people and a connection to yourself that stays intact.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious, think about starting out. How do you give advice to someone who's a little tentative or a little, you know, public speaking, but really want to share something? And I'm sure that you don't start at slams, but you start somewhere. But I was wondering if you could just, you know, what advice do you have for those folks?
I would say start writing. One. And what makes spoken word so freeing for me, what makes it part of my liberation as an artist and an educator, is that the lack of judgment. So when I was writing as a young person, I was writing because I had to. I had something I needed to get off my chest. you know, and I had feelings, I had anger, I had, you know, celebrations, I had questions as a young person, and I needed to get it out. So I wrote. I wasn't thinking about, does it sound good, or does it, you know, am I going to win the slam? I was just writing. And anyone who wants to perform, start with the non-judgmental, just write it down. The realness, write it down. Don't judge yourself. Don't try to make it sound any old kind of way, because when you write it down and then you look back at it, there's going to be one line that's going to stick out to you. It's going to be like, ooh, I wrote that. And that's where your poem begins.
Yep.
But you first have to get it out. That's why I love spoken word so much, because you do responsibly get it out on stage. There's something that happens there. I've had so many cathartic moments on stage, but I first had to write down my truth as it is. And then from there, get to the creative part of crafting the piece. So anyone out there, write. Just write. Start with the free write. Don't think about it. Don't judge yourself. Don't think about, it has to be the spoken word piece right now. It doesn't. Just start with the free write. And then from there, you're going to surprise yourself.
Yeah.
Guarantee it.
Do you remember the first time you performed?
Ooh.
Do you remember?
Well, I've been on stage for many, many times. I remember the first time I performed as a teenager, but people have had me perform. My parents are, I can't say that they're crazy, but they knew that I was an entertainer. So I've stayed on the stage since I've been like, you know, months, not months, since I was around 1 or 2. And then at least every other year I've done something on stage. But poetry, I was the end of the middle of my junior year of high school. That's the first time I performed, and I felt like it was myself on stage. So yeah, maybe like 12 years ago, I think.
It was that same summer that I was in that spoken word class. I was picked. There's only so many people that are picked to perform on the weekends, and I was picked. And I remember I probably went through it super fast. Probably just like zoomed right through the poem because I was super nervous. But there's nothing like it. Even beyond nervousness and fear, or, you know, your fear of public speaking, the first time that you perform on stage and see that you could do it, it's over. You're not going to want to stop.
No, it changes you. And one thing I will say that I got from from here in New York is the community of a poetry workshop, and just poetry community, but especially a workshop that's for you. And by for you, meaning like you know, the prompts of the workshop and the person that's guiding the workshop. If you're a teenager, you know, you need a mentor, or you need a mentor and you're even older, and everything in that workshop is for you, meaning like this is just a place where you and these few people write. That's a part of that first step of just writing, because if you get a time with people that whether or not you guys are online or not, since it's COVID times, if you guys are but you know, if it is a place where you can be in person, then you get to really like just have this synergy with other people, and poems bounce off of each other. It gives you the confidence to want to go forward, and if not perform yourself, at least support somebody that's performing, and just watch people perform.
Yeah, watching people perform is another thing I would do. If you're not at the writing part just yet, you know, watch people perform, hear other people perform, because in that you're guaranteed to be inspired to find your own voice. Yeah, I think that's the key, finding your voice. And it's a lifelong process. I'm doing it all the time.
Yeah, we watched the people that back in when we were, you know, teenagers, they were pros, you know,
they're performing all over the country.
The Strivers Row and everybody like that. Yeah,
we keep watching them.
Yeah, still, even though know them, it's like, nope, still got to look at the performance and perfect the craft.
So that reminds me, I think we always send a follow-up email to folks that are tuning in. So maybe we could share some links of those people.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
So hearing about like the first step is this writing process, and sometimes it's cooperative. And I know that sometimes when I write, I hear sometimes a rhythm. Does music ever affect you when you're writing? Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that poem that I wrote in high school, I was, you know, when I first started, rhythm it kind of seeped its way into spoken word because you're speaking and you're performing out. And I found myself in a constant rhythm. When you're memorizing, you want to make sure you memorize the words, not the rhythm, because if something happens, then you forget. You don't want to lean too much on a rhythm. But definitely, music has helped. Like with the poem that I performed in the beginning, I say, I say, I say. The more you perform, the more you kind of catch that rhythm, and the poem will tell you. The more that you write, and the more that you kind of say those words out loud, performing can be, saying a poem in the mirror. When you will find that music.
I want to add, because it's really important, I learned, and I think you'll say yeah on that when you're writing a poem and you're memorizing it and you want to perform, even if it's just for yourself, if you get to a part where you weren't sure about when you were writing it, and it doesn't, you keep messing up the words to transition into the next line, or you keep forgetting that, and it's just this one part, the words will tell you whether or not they're supposed to be in the poem. I know it sounds, oh, well, no,
it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that happen where there's a poem that I'm like, I keep messing up this part because it's not fitting into the rhythm.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. It sort of tells you the words.
Yes, it does. It's so true. That's such a good point.
It sets the tone. Did that a couple times, but it's in that music of the way of like, so my dad's group, The Last Poets, he always talks about this the old drummer and even the drummer that they have now. I'll speak of the drummer that they have now, Baba Tunde. If he's playing the drum, if you're doing a poem and you're part of the group, or it's so funny that we talk about rhythm, because rhythm has to go with the poem because they're performing it. So each poem that they're going to share, they're writing it, they're sharing it to hear if it fits the rhythm and it gels well with the group. And the first drummer, God forgive me for not remembering his name, if he did not take out his drum and start drumming while you were performing or reciting your new poem, it wasn't good. And that's for spoken word. Obviously, if you're writing your own poems for yourself, it's different. But when it comes down for spoken word and comes down for, it doesn't. We used to say this thing in workshops of getting ready to perform. It was an exercise of, say, we'll sit right here. You're over there. We won't move physically until your words move us.
Wow.
Speaks to that rhythm.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. And so you were just mentioning your dad as The Last Poets. Could you tell us what that is, the group, and what he did?
Yes, his name is Abiodun Oyewole of The Last Poets. Everybody just calls him Dune. And the Last Poets, they are a group that a lot of people call some of the founding fathers of hip hop, or founding fathers of rap, as they would like to be called, because rap is rhythm and poetry. And they have their first album was in 1970, but the singles and things came out in 1969. So the songs of like When the Revolution Comes, and a lot of songs that kind of set the time for set the stage for that age, and a lot of things that got sampled later on for hip hop and rap songs. So a lot of things that were kind of the basis for it. And that's why, but it wasn't just The Last Poets. The Last Poets, Gil Scott-Heron, and Gil Scott came after, and then there's Amiri Baraka. He was around the same time, and just a lot of them. And they did workshops in the East Wind to speak on the workshop some more, and a lot of people came by there because they were about community building. And you know what? I'll say it right now. My dad, he was with Cicely Tyson's daughter, and she was about. She just recently talked about her daughter before she passed in her memoir. And so everything that they were around, the spoken word was built around, and they say it in their first album, all about this. When the revolution comes, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? And then everything that they physically did afterwards was about that community building and help. So that's who and what The Last Poets are, and then they performed. I guess the last thing that they got noticed for was the Grammys in 2007. It was on Common's album. I think the album was called Go, for a song called The Corner. And that's my dad and Uncle Umar. But yeah, they've done a lot for hip hop, rap, and they continue to do as much as they can.
That's awesome. What a great thing to share with your dad too.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Tayllor, what you were talking about when you needed to get something off your chest, and I thought we could just talk a little bit about some of the topics of spoken word, like at least in the U.S. And a lot of it appears to be around social justice, race, community. Obviously, there are these personal ones as well. And I do think that there's this special power that spoken word has to really communicate social justice issues, also environmental issues. And I do think it's this need to be an advocate almost that propels some of this. And yes, I think there's anger involved, there's frustration, there's misunderstanding, and how do you communicate that? And I don't know if you could, both of you, talk a little bit more about sort of the topics that interest you, and basically topics in spoken word, and why you think people choose certain topics.
Sure. So I definitely started out writing for myself, so I had something to say for me. But once, and the more I got into spoken word, the more I was performing for myself, I realized that there were other things that I wanted to say that maybe connected to me, but also were affecting other people. Racism, the environment, sexism. And my poem started to take a shift. And I think it came from that same feeling of, like you said, this advocacy. Because my voice is a tool, and I can weaponize it for whatever I want. And I choose to weaponize it for justice, all types of justice. So that's where that poem came from. I think the assignment in that poem, in high school, was like maybe to write a paper or do like a visual art. And the quickest way that I could get that visceral feeling of, I'm originally from Los Angeles, so the environment was super, and still is super important. I went to school across the street from the beach. So, we would do beach cleanup. We would, walk over there and have our classes over there, and also LA, the appearance, we're watering our grass, even though we probably shouldn't be watering as much. But there's this appearance in Los Angeles, and I was very much connected to it. And there was this visceral feeling that, as pretty as Los Angeles was, there was still injustice in terms of how we treated our environment. And I led with that feeling. So the feeling that I have as a Black woman in this country, well, that I led with that feeling. It's almost like it's not like a lump in your throat. It's this push to want to do something now. And I know that my voice is powerful, and every person in this webinar, your voice is powerful. So I encourage you to use it. And that's what pushed me to write about that. And I love nature. So even the poems, like his poem, this connection to nature, that's advocacy. And I think sometimes just showing up on stage is advocacy. That's activism.
That was really interesting. Where you like, kind of like Olympic throat, but not. It made me think that it's like the opposite of gasping for air when you have something so rich. Wow, I'm just good.
Good.
No, you're good. Wow, but the topics, it's so interesting because we would often we, meaning me and other members of Urban Word, we would so also New York is really different from other states when it comes down to slam poetry, because for our teenagers, they have a preliminary. Well, you got to get into the preliminary, and then there's preliminaries, semifinals, and then finals. And the finals are at the Apollo each year, regardless of the last this year and last year. And we end up seeing a lot of topics of pain, just like we've been talking about. But then the topics that I would like to talk about, and I mean, there have been, because I when I started writing poetry, I always talked about love in some way, shape, or form. I'm a lover boy. I love to love. And then I started to find myself in other ways of talking about it, even if I was talking about some anger. My dad always says that that a poem isn't over if it ends, if it has a bad ending. And I just think that's so interesting, because then there's so many sad poems that I know, but even if a poem is dreadfully, there's something that brings you down in it, there's got to be a glimmer of hope. Even if it's not, the biggest thing, it's just like, all right, well, all isn't lost, like we still have each other, or something that lets you know. Most of the poems that I know, they do have something like that. But there are poems about, even if there's some kind of pain, I always find that there's some kind of link to togetherness. There was a poem that this young woman did on a finals, and we usually get cancer poems, or like, dad, mom passing away, dad passing away, but she had a poem about scoliosis and her mom having scoliosis, and then
I remember this poem.
And she had scoliosis as well, and so she got to connect to her mother through her poem and through generations of herself, of her family, but then also stand strong and not crumble under what has physically caused her and her mother pain. So that's what I find so strong and so powerful about poems like that, because then they can end up coming out empowering you instead of making you remember how many things that are bad going on. You remember that you can speak up about them.
It's a healing tool.
Form of resilience or something,
Yes,
it's a healing tool, because there's something special that happens on stage. Like I said, that connection, not only with the community, but also for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 moms. I did a poem about having 2 moms and how people make assumptions and judgments about me as a teenager. And I remember I was in Los Angeles. I finished the poem. I was crying, of course, and I just ran into somebody, just a random person, and they hugged me. And there was something healing about that. It doesn't always have to be that, like you said. There's a hopeful ending, but there's something. There's an exchange that happens for you and for the audience, and I think that's where the advocacy comes in, and the change making.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking back to when I was taught poetry. I think it was 14 years old that I had to read Beowulf in Old English, and I hated the book. I hated poetry. It just turned me off. And I think there's like an old saying that teachers know how to kill poetry for students, because they teach something that's inappropriate, too hard, or that you have to understand meters, metaphors, similes, automatopoeia, and it just dries it up for the student. They feel like there's a right or a wrong, and they're not really experiencing either the emotion of the poem or the full poem and realizing they can have their own interpretation. But I know that both of you guys are educators too, and it would be great to hear how I know there are challenges too with bringing spoken word into the classroom or your students, but how do you, and Tayllor, I know that you were talking about this, even call and response that sometimes you do for your kids to make them feel, but if you could talk about how you can introduce it into your classrooms, it would be great to hear, or your students you work with.
Sure. So I know that there was a question in the chat about this as well. So perfect. The first thing that I do is I usually kind of clear the air. You can't really learn from like if your cup is already full. So we kind of get it all out there, okay? Like, what is poetry? Poetry's boring. It has to rhyme. It's Shakespeare only. Like, let's get that all out of the way and we'll put it out there, and then we can clear it. I also start with where they're at. That's why I, decided to check in with all of you who are in this webinar. Especially for young people, I usually work with middle schoolers, and there's a lot going on for them developmentally, demographically. There's a lot going on for these different groups for these young people. So I start with them, writing where they're at, starting with the free write, and then from there, going to the one word or phrase. Going from there, you're going to write a poem. What's a poem? What's a poem? Okay. I usually go with the basics, and I don't know if you do the same thing. I just do like stanzas. That's it.
After the introductory stuff.
Yeah, after the introduction, I just do stanzas. Yeah. We're not going to go into, onomatopoeia just yet, all these things, because honestly, it comes with it. Because they want to create and tell their story, they're going to say I'm as angry as fire. They're going to say I'm cold as ice. You just, you know, like it's just getting them kind of started on the right track. So I have them start with where they're at as people without the poetry part first. And from there, we get the poem out. And then we have their first poem. And then they're like, I can't believe I did that. Usually that's what happens. That's me. I did that poem. Yeah, that's your poem.
Or you'll get a kid like, I won't say her name, but she was a great when I taught poetry at my school, at the school that I work at, I got to teach poetry from kindergarten to high school, because it was after school workshop. So it was whomever was around, and there's one she had a great poem, but then it's like, oh no, I wrote something stupid, I don't know. And I'm just like, I'm not sure. It doesn't look like it lacks intelligence, but I'll give it a read. And it was amazing. You know, just also having somebody else to, I don't know if she actually thought that, or if it was just like playing around, because kids. But it's really, really good to see that that growth. But is there anything else that you do for it? Because there's one thing I'm gonna say that
okay. The only thing I would say is for the English teachers out there is to put it all out there. We know what kids are thinking about poetry. Let's just put it out there. I usually do like a when you think of poetry, what do you think of? And they say this, and then I'm like, do you think of YouTube? No. Do you think of money? No. Do you think of Subway advertisements? No. Well, poetry can be this too. Poetry can be anything you want it to be. Sometimes I start with more abstract, like picture poems or haikus, just to let them get a taste of that success of expressing themselves after you clear the air of the mess of what people think poetry is. What were you gonna say?
No,
I can talk about this all day.
But you're so right about the haikus, because I feel like haikus are such a blessing, because you can everybody, there's no way that doesn't like a haiku. Like, I mean, it's
7-5. It's a Japanese
575. Yeah,
575.
And it's because it's so easy. Yeah. And I can, like, if I put that on for older kids, I'd be like, come on, you guys probably watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. Remember when Sokka had a haiku battle? Oh yeah, we could have haikus. To kids, show them a cute little haiku. Oh my God, I could do it. And show them the oh, it looks so nice. It looks like a diamond. Great. Everybody has some way or shape or form to connect to a haiku. I always find something to connect students to or people to poetry. And when I do a lot of the same things that my dad does, but I do a lot of things my own way. So I start if everybody's around the same age too, and if it's not kindergarten or first grade, because sometimes they don't want to write, they want to draw first, which is okay. Then they write after. But I have them write about their sign. They'll be either water sign, fire sign, earth sign, or air sign. And everybody, so then that's a whole different conversation that they didn't even think about was going to happen involving poetry. Zodiacs and it's something else. Even if somebody didn't like it, they'd be like, oh, well, I'm an earth sign, or oh, I'm a Capricorn. Oh, I know it was an earth sign. Okay. And then, it's from whatever their perspective on, it's from whatever perspective they want to write on, but I'll give them examples of, like, you can write from being earth, or you can write from your love of earth, or you can write from being fire, or you can write from appreciating water or appreciating air. Or what if you were, what's another word for air? Wind. Are you the wind? Do you flow? Do you breeze? So I've done that, and that's always a great introductory thing.
Start with the earth.
Yeah. Exactly.
Tayllor, you were talking about at one point we had a discussion and about when someone is performing and how you make someone feel comfortable, and you ask the audience, could you just take us through?
Yes. So when I was teaching in Portland, Oregon, we had I think they were like 4th or 5th graders, and to kind of get people comfortable with the performance part, we did a call and response. So I would have a student go to the front of the room, and they would say, I deserve to have my story told. And then we would respond as a class, we want to hear your story. And it would kind of create a community norm. As much after, there's, debunking the myths of poetry, but then creating the community of poetry in your classroom, which also comes from like the storytelling tradition. And there's a lot of room there when it's no longer a fourth or fifth grade classroom where they're tearing each other apart, which sometimes happens. It becomes, I'm supportive of you. And I did that once. There was a student who was in fourth going to fifth grade who performed, quiet girl who, she performed, she did her thing. They said, we want to hear your story. And they were filming and, and I went over to hug her and she was crying. She had just tears just kept coming. And I think it's because she saw what that power was. She was on stage for less than a minute. So if that doesn't show you what spoken word and what performance and poetry can do, I don't know what will. She was in the fourth grade. I mean, the tears, she wasn't sad. I think she was just overwhelmed at what she had done.
It is an overwhelming thing.
And was after that call and response, yeah.
I'm sure you remember your first time that you performed it and you felt like, whoa.
Yeah, someone grabbed me and said, like, you spoke to my experience. And I was like, I did? Whoa!
It's an amazing feeling. It's an amazing feeling. I rushed out of the New York and I just looked outside like, I feel like I'm up there right now. It was crazy.
That's such a great technique for teachers because it's so empowering for these kids to feel like their voice, that someone wants to listen to them. So I love that. And we're coming up, well, it's almost 10 minutes left, but I have noticed some questions in the chat. And if anybody has other questions, please just write them in. And one, which is sort of interesting, I just read was, how do you form your words to inspire people to take action? Or is that?
No, that's
a good question.
That's an assignment that I've gotten from Urban Word. They were like, all right, time to get people to vote. So then we had to think about that. And we've phrased it in different ways, but because we knew there were a lot of people that were already social justice champions there. So they were like, we know that this needs to happen. People need to vote. And so we took conversation and debate and transferred that into poetry, from, topics of current events. And it's like, all right, well, we feel this. And then ask somebody what they heard from somebody that didn't know what was happening. Like, just play the devil's advocate, but also make it clear that you're not. If I'm doing a poetry about voting, if it was this past year, if I was doing a poem about voting, then I would have mentioned that people might feel that they feel pushed aside, but at the same time disregarded. But at the same time, there's something. If there's one actual physical action that could help, and this is part of that action because it's something that literally will be counted. So.
Putting an action into the poem somehow.
Yeah. Putting that action into there. I think I was really specific when I mentioned the oil spill in my poem because I have another one because it was really, they had that on the news a lot back then, 10 years ago. So I saw that and I wanted to make sure that I was being responsible enough of not just using my voice, but not using my voice for, the things that mattered, that I cared about, which is like the ocean.
For me, I personify. There's a lot of personification of certain things, like the poem I did in high school. I personified nature as a lady who was homeless and she was dying and no one noticed. So I
create such empathy, even more empathy.
Right. So I think in terms of forming of words, I think that's a great skill in terms of adding an action to it. And also, sometimes it's not as much on the nose as much as it's, creating that empathy, creating that curiosity to understand. And sometimes there is like the surprising, like when I first heard his poem, I didn't expect to hear oil spill. And that kind of like, oh, wow. It kind of took me back.
Yeah, no,
there's one other question here too, or a couple more. That one is, any tips for beginner poets that have trouble getting how they feel out on the page?
I got it.
Yeah.
I got it.
One of the things I would say while she's getting her thing is don't judge yourself while you're writing. There was this a college professor of mine that told us to literally not pick up the pen off of the page until like the time constraint was over, and which was might have been like 10 minutes. So we didn't pick it up. Like if there was a space, it was like a little bit of a line because we didn't pick up the pen off. Like so you're writing script or print or whichever, but it's connected. So I feel like doing that for a certain amount of time helps because then you just kind of have to go and then also not stopping because if you start to think, if you're on a roll writing and you start to think, he was like, it's one part of the brain infiltrating the other part of the brain, and you want to keep it away. So just keep writing, pushing for that time, which are like 5 minutes. That's my.
This is my skill. Oh yes, actually this one's filled in, so this is perfect.
Yes.
So this is for environmental justice, which was posted on our posted on Bowseat. So I kind of start with what the word is or what the image is. So I have environmental justice, and then I create a web on what I think about. Clean water, or someone sipping water from a river. And then I start to follow the image and see where the image takes me instead of like my mind on what sounds good or what's really good. I start with this and then I do that. Mm-hmm. And then I do the free write from one of the images around here. And from this image, you will directly address whatever it is, the feeling, and it's not as overwhelming. This is also great for in the classroom. Mm-hmm.
And so sorry, what are the spokes coming out? So there's like a main idea, but then
there's a main idea, so environmental justice, and then it's what do you think of when you think of environmental justice? And then these are the images. And then from here, I can pick one of these. So now I don't have to write about environmental justice. I can write about my mom throwing away her inhaler because she lived in LA.
Love that.
And got asthma from all the smog. I can write about that, mm-hmm. and that will touch on environmental justice. Mm-hmm. And that's something someone can connect to.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, and maybe we could talk about, Tayllor, you could talk about the Voice of the Sea Award, and
absolutely
even have a slide up, but.
So here we are. So the Voice of the Sea Award, and shout out to all the educators who are here, because this is also a great way to connect with others, to connect to your students in terms of adding writing in. So it is the celebration of spoken word poetry, and it is part of the Ocean Awareness Contest, which I learned more about when I connected to Bowseat, and that meant a lot. So it's for a student of all ages, and worldwide. So I look forward to reaching out to some of my colleagues in South Africa to participate. And the theme is water rising. And this is like, again, because I'm an educator at heart and we're educators at heart, this is a great way to work with your students to start, using their voice, especially someone said for social justice and activism, having those exercises to start with. So you can submit through, I think Alyssa put the link to learn more.
That's it, right?
In the chat. Thank you. And it's until June 14th, 2021. So I will be, working with Bowseat. You will see more of me talking about spoken word, talking about the process. If there's any students who feel like they can't do it, you tell them to come see me, because we will fix that. There is and someone please correct me if I don't have the right wording, but there is the junior and senior prizes, awards. Senior is $1,500 and junior is $1,000. So another incentive, but really the goal and the prize is for students to use their voices to advocate for themselves and for the planet. And it's a win-win is what I will say. Did I miss anything, Linda? I hope not.
No, I mean, that's great. And I think if there are questions, definitely reach out to us at info, and, we'd be happy to talk more about how you can introduce your classroom, or even if you're a student, how you can participate. So that's awesome. And there was one request. I guess they missed your performance in the beginning. We have like 2 minutes left. Tayllor, do you mind could you putting you on the spot here, just as we end out part of your poem that you started in, and then maybe that's the way that we could end. And thank you both so much. It was really lovely and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
No problem. I'm looking for the poem right now. Are you talking about the one from high school?
The one you just read.
Oh, the one that I just read. Oh, sure, I can do that one. I thought I was being put on the spot, but I was like, whew. So the poem that I performed earlier is called Water is Rising. Water is rising, so I can too. From the depths of the world's beginning, she's churning a song in the story on our shores that we've never heard before. Some say she's pleading, others say she's damning. I say, if she rises, I can too. If she storms and swells and sparkles on the horizon day and night without asking for permission, I can too. If she can take my prayers at the edge of a waterfall and whisper her secrets at the edge of a stream, let me be her boulder. Let me be her creek bed. Let me be the cliffside she can glide on. I say, if water is rising to the occasion to meet me, then I will meet her. Both hands submerge into the clear current, and I will speak. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.